What do most Fortune 500 executives have in common? They learned important lessons on the fields and courts of their high school and collegiate sports teams. This is true for both men and women. Ernst & Young found that a whopping 94% of women holding a C-suite position played sports. Their wins and losses shaped their habits and who they would become. Join me on my journey to sit with some of the brightest executives in the world as we discuss how sports shape their professional trajectory. In partnership with Chief Executive Magazine, the voice of America's CEO community, I'm your host, Don Yeager, and this is Corporate Competitor Podcast. With me for today's episode is the CEO of FanDuel, Amy Howe. FanDuel is the premier destination for sports fans online, and Amy runs the show. She joined FanDuel from Live Nation Entertainment, where she held several positions, culminating as the global COO at Ticketmaster. She led that company's digital transformation, growing the mobile app install base by 400%. Prior to Live Nation Entertainment, Amy enjoyed advising Fortune 500 clients on growth strategy as a partner at McKinsey & Company in Los Angeles. And today, she is bringing that coaching that she has done for so many to you. Her sports interests span coast to coast. She is a Cornell alum and a Buffalo Bills fan and a loyal supporter of UCLA athletics. Before we jump into the conversation, remember to download today's notes and reflection questions on corporatecompetitorpodcast.com/109.
Try to build in time to think. Some of my favorite time is when I'm on a plane ride because nobody distracts me. I can block everything out and really focus on something that's complex and really go deep on something as opposed to trying to do the transactional 30, 40, 50-minute meetings. Take the time to invest in being emotionally prepared and mentally prepared.
Amy, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Don. I'm so excited to be here.
Awesome. I know we're both lovers of Coach Wooden and UCLA athletics and had the opportunity several months ago to meet at the MIT Sloan Conference. So the possibility of getting in and learning more of your journey to the leadership at FanDuel is really quite impactful. We're excited about it today.
No, thank you. And yes, big John Wooden fan, so we have a lot in common.
We probably raised our children teaching them Coach Wooden quotes all over the place.
Sure did. Most quoted individual in our household.
I love it. You know, Amy, I want to go back to growing up in a farming community, Eden, New York, identical twin sister, older brother, very competitive household, lots of competition here. Talk to me about how competition impacted your childhood.
There are a few things that will make you more competitive in life than having an identical twin sister. Being in a small town where people compare literally everything you do. Oh, it has been such a huge driver. My sister Kelly and I, we were the big fish in a very small pond. We always describe it as healthy rivalry. Two competitors play against each other and up each other's games.
Right.
Most people have no idea where Eden, New York is. It's actually south of Buffalo, maybe 7,000 people on a good day. Very hardworking, really a farming community. The grit and determination, trust me, trying to make it through those winters in Buffalo, you have to have some level of grit. But it's also a very high integrity, low ego community. I've taken that with me really my whole life.
Grit, being able to kind of throw yourself in even when it's not pretty. What does grit look like for you and the ability to make yourself a little tougher than some of the others?
You're going to get knocked down your whole life. When you get knocked down, pick yourself back up, move on, and be better because of that experience. I talk to my kids about this all the time. It's funny. My husband and I have 3 boys. We have a 16-year-old, a 13-year-old, and a 10-year-old. And at the end of the school year, my son he had COVID. He was behind in all of his exams. And we talk about the ability to pick yourself up when you're having a really tough time and know that you'll prevail. Grit is really resilience when you face those tough times. It's a muscle that you need to develop and build over time. It doesn't matter how old you are, you're always going to have peaks and valleys in life and your career. And so if you can learn that early on in life, it's a defining characteristic.
Grit is a muscle. That's so well put because human nature can be, oh boy, times are tough. Instead of exercising the muscle, I'm going to curl up on the couch and grab a bag of chips.
Yeah.
That's not how you succeed.
It's a hard muscle to build, right?
Yeah. Was there someone in that world that you might think about all these years later? Someone who really pushed you beyond your limits?
I grew up in an era where we did all the sports, gymnastics, tennis, golf, and I was on a swim team. We kind of did the rotation. And early on, there were a couple of coaches that I had that just, I saw what it looked like to really invest in somebody, give them the tough feedback and make sure that they're putting the grit, if you will, and grinding and working really hard. I started out as a competitive gymnast. That was my first true entrance into competitive sports. You're both on a team, but you're also competing individually. My early gymnastics coaches were instrumental, but my mom in particular, she was always the one that was picking up my sister and I at gymnastics and taking us to our swim lesson or whatever it was. But she was there and committed. That really had a profound impact because sports is something I've taken with me throughout my entire life.
Mm.
My parents believed in exposing us to a lot of different types of sports. They philosophically believed that sports were really critical because you were going to learn so many life skills, which in some respects is actually very different than what I see youth sports right now. I don't know if this is biased because I live on the West Coast, but I feel like now kids are being asked to specialize so early.
Yeah.
And you just want them to be able to do the full range of sports and not have to, in third or fourth grade, specialize in one activity.
You know, I love that you were moving around and actually learning different skills because that's the beauty of all those different sports. They're exercising not just your body, but your mind to stretch in different places. Can you think of a story where some leadership lesson you learned through that journey might have influenced the way you lead today as the CEO of FanDuel?
Looking at so many different teams that I've participated in, how you build a high performing team. It's funny. I went from gymnastics into cheerleading for many years. I would actually hide the fact that I was a cheerleader. And now I'm actually quite proud of it because if I look at the team that my sister and I built together, it was a phenomenal team. Many of the things that I've taken from that are very relevant to how you build high performing teams. You can't just gravitate to people that are like you. Imagine having a team of all quarterbacks. That doesn't work.
Right.
So you need to make sure that you're building a team that meets the skill profiles for what that team needs to be successful. So you need different personality profiles. So diversity actually matters when you're building a team. The other thing that I've really taken away is the importance of being coachable, whether it's in a sport or in business. Being coachable in life is such a critical characteristic, and sometimes it's really hard to be coachable. The flip side of that, sometimes the best athletes are not always the best coaches. You see that with some of the best athletes in the world, whether it's Michael Jordan or, pick your favorite athlete,
Magic Johnson. Yeah.
Magic Johnson, right? There's so many elements of how you build and create a really high performing team that I've taken from my many years of being a competitive athlete.
I love that. So, how have you learned to be coachable and how are you teaching the ability to accept feedback?
Sometimes it's really hard because it is human nature when somebody gives you feedback or constructive criticism. Sometimes it's really hard to hear it. I was in consulting for 17 years, growing up at McKinsey for, almost 15 years. It is a culture that if you cannot figure out how to be coachable and take feedback all the time, literally on a daily, weekly basis, you're not going to be successful. McKinsey was built as an apprenticeship culture. People are really your only asset. So if you're not investing in your people, which means you're constantly giving them professional feedback and how do you continue to grow as a leader, then you're not going to get the best out of people. There's not a single person in the world who isn't working on something. We're all humans. Working to be better every single day is really important. Becoming a better listener,
Mm.
listen, myself included, sometimes you have a tendency to want to react right away and say, well, here are the 5 reasons why that doesn't make sense. Becoming a good listener is part of being coachable, but it's also, I think, part of just improving yourself both personally and professionally. And that can be very hard. Being a good listener can be really hard.
It is a lost art.
Yeah.
It truly is. It seems like you always have to be thinking several steps ahead because you're in an industry that changes daily. You aren't sure what league or what regulatory body is going to shift the way your work is perceived or even run. How do you constantly stay on the ready at FanDuel?
You're spot on. If you're looking for certainty, this is not a great industry for you to be in. Massachusetts just was legalized the other night. Will California be approved on the ballot this November? Don't know. So there's a massive amount of uncertainty. Fortunately, I've come from industries, ticketing is a great example, that in some respects were prime for disruption. But I also lived through the largest shutdown of the live entertainment industry with COVID. There's an element of learning how to be agile when you're operating in highly uncertain and dynamic environments. Learning to embrace ambiguity is really important. There are very few jobs, industries, careers where you're going to have certainty. And if COVID taught us one thing, you have to be able to operate in very uncertain times, knowing when to move quickly and knowing when to be a bit more methodical is really important, especially when things are changing so quickly, because there are times where you actually do need to move quickly. And then there are other times where, on the flip side, moving too quickly actually is a liability. When I have pattern recognition around something and I have a high degree of certainty that I know what the right answer is, I'll move and I'll make the decision quickly. If, however, I know the stakes of a certain decision are higher, I'm pretty good at admitting what I don't know. And if I feel like I need to make sure I get the facts or pull in a broader set of voices before I make a decision. Now, the longer you're in your career, you see more, you have more exposure to different types of problems and pattern recognition. But the reality is, if you take sports betting, there's a lot of things that we're up against that nobody has solved before.
You've had to do that in your previous position as well at Ticketmaster, where you were busy, as you said, trying to figure out how do we go through the greatest shutdown in the history of that entire industry. Even in the middle of all of that, you continued to find ways to grow the organization, helping the mobile app grow as it did, other things. In those moments, how are you continuing to convince people that there is a plan?
Gosh, honesty and transparency goes a long way. Nobody gives you a handbook for how you manage through a pandemic. In the very early days of the pandemic, everyone was trying to figure out how long this thing was going to last. We all got it wrong. I remember when I last left the Live Nation headquarters, we all kind of looked at each other and we're like, this feels weird, but not really sure when we're going to be back. We were trying to decide how quickly you hold on before you need to start to manage your cost base. And there was a lot of government subsidy, which was incredibly helpful. But at some point, we also needed to do some furloughs. By far the hardest professional moment of my career. These people didn't do anything wrong. They just happened to be in an industry which literally went from booming to a complete shutdown overnight. It was a really hard moment. I remember finishing that call and feeling about as bad as I've ever felt in my professional career.
Wow.
From that point on, the entire organization knew that we were doing the best we could to manage through a very difficult transition with a tremendous amount of uncertainty. And so being transparent and saying, I don't have all the answers right now. We're going to work through this together. And I'm going to give you as much transparency as I can as we go through this is really critical. And having real empathy in those moments went a long way and matters a lot. And it's not just a COVID situation. What we're doing is incredibly hard. And I don't always understand what folks may be facing at home. So being empathetic and creating an environment where people feel safe and bringing that into how I lead day-to-day COVID or, pandemic or not has been really important.
One of the things that has marked your career and many of the different aspects of it that I had the chance to study in prepping for today is you're a stickler for the importance of preparation. It's our job to be mentally, physically, emotionally prepared for opportunity and challenge. You're a John Wooden fan, so I shouldn't be surprised by this. But how do you teach that to other people? I mean, there are a lot of folks who just love the flying by the seat of their pants. If you're a leader who loves preparation, How are you teaching them the art of preparation without taking off their shoes and socks?
Well, one of our favorite John Wooden quotes in our family is failing to prepare is preparing to fail.
Yes.
It's so true. There's so many different aspects of preparing, whether it's as an athlete or as an executive, the mental, the physical, and the emotional. There's preparation you need to do in all three of those. And when you feel prepared and strong on all three of those dimensions, it just makes you a higher performing individual and executive. I've always had a level of discipline my entire life. I run every single morning, or I do some sort of exercise because obviously it helps physically, but it is actually the moment of the day where I feel like I can clear my head. I can think about what I need to get done for the day. It's a massive stress reliever.
Yeah.
I actually view it as a privilege to be able to work out every day. I had to testify in front of Congress. Trust me, I I prepped for that.
I bet days worth.
Yeah, I walked around with a binder for a long time, making sure I knew my stuff. How to manage time well. It's also a skill and a little bit of a muscle. It's one of the things they actually teach kids in school is how to manage your time. If you let your calendar just kind of happen to you and it gets filled up with meetings, some which you may or may not be in, then you're probably not spending your time in the most effective manner. It's just a matter of figuring out how I block the time. I tend to be a morning person. And so I will try to consciously block out the morning. If I don't get my workout in the morning, it typically doesn't happen. And I've figured that out over time. But I also try to build in time for me to think. Because if you're in transactional meetings all day long, it's really difficult to do higher quality, deeper thinking. And so I actively manage my calendar to be able to fit in the physical and take the time to invest in being emotionally prepared and mentally prepared.
It's pretty powerful.
Some of my favorite time is when I'm on a plane ride because nobody distracts me. I can block everything out and really focus on something that's complex. If you really have to think about complex strategy problems or you've got to review a document in a really thoughtful way, coming into and out of it is just not that helpful. The best athletes in the world are the ones that prepare. Look at what Kobe Bryant did. And
The unseen hours.
yeah, up at the crack of dawn, always putting the hours in. Now, that doesn't mean you need to do what Kobe Bryant does, but showing up, whether it's for an important meeting or even having a thoughtful conversation with an employee where you're going to give them tough feedback. There are certain conversations that are much harder to have and certain problems that are harder to solve. For those types of either decisions or interactions, we come together and we all block a day or two just to focus and really go deep on something as opposed to trying to do the transactional 30, 40, 50-minute meetings, which typically don't get you to the right outcome for more complex decisions. Being thoughtful about how you have those interactions actually matters in life.
So I have to say, we've done 100 plus of these interviews. You're one of the first to really talk about that idea of building in time to think. Boy, I love that. The one thing that's always fascinated me about consultants is that you're that third party. You're outside throwing advice in, hoping to help organizations find their way. What was the transition like being an outside voice to becoming an internal leader where your voice matters? Everything will come down to your decision. What was that transition like?
Such a good question. I always had a hunch that I was going to love being an operator. Now, having made the transition, I was right. I will tell you, there's a healthy dose of pragmatism that you learn really quickly when you make the transition from being a McKinsey consultant to being in an operating role. Part of what consulting teaches you is how to solve very complex problems that you've never solved before. Typically, you're solving either politically charged or emotionally charged decisions where you're going to have multiple points of view in an organization. There's an art for how you make those decisions less emotional and less political. You're not always going to have a McKinsey team implementing everything you do. And the more you can, if you will, make the complex simple for organizations, you're probably going to get a lot more done rather than trying to juggle too many things. At the end of the day, you have to learn the art of influencing your stakeholders, in many cases, a broad set of stakeholders. And those people don't report to you. When I first came into Live Nation and even FanDuel, nobody reported to me, but I got a lot done because I knew how to work in an organization.
I love it. Right now, FanDuel, you are in quite a momentum-filled window. Many of us who love sports can feel momentum, right? We see it on the field or court. And that's true in business too, in my opinion. Sometimes you don't get the chance to see it as broadly because it's not on live TV. Sometimes you have a moment that helps propel you or even your opponent. Have you had a moment or an event, maybe even in your current role, where something has happened that has given you that oomph? And how do you extend that momentum?
It's a great question. I absolutely believe in the concept of momentum. If I look at my business, it's a flywheel business. And as you know, with flywheel businesses, the hardest thing is actually getting momentum in the first place. Once you have it, it becomes much easier. At FanDuel, I stepped into the interim CEO role about a year ago and then formally took over as CEO in October. As you can imagine, when you're stepping in as interim CEO, the most important thing for me was to make sure that I could build the best leadership team around me. It doesn't matter how good I am, I don't scale as an individual. There were certain folks that had been with FanDuel since the very early daily fantasy sports days, before sports betting was ever legalized. Their institutional knowledge was really important. At the same time, we're changing rapidly. The company is scaling, and there was an acknowledgement that in some cases we needed to bring new talent into the organization. Making sure I have the best possible leadership team was one of the most important things I could do as a CEO. And I was incredibly appreciative of the team that I had at the time because they said, we're behind you, you've got this, and we're supportive. And just knowing that gave me momentum, but it also allowed me the space to be able to figure out how we build the best team in the industry.
Then, as the people choices coalesce and good things start to happen, you have the right people in place to be able to take advantage of those good things. And that's a huge piece of building the momentum loop that's so fascinating to us. Amy, John Wooden would be proud. You got a good Wooden quote in. You're raising your children properly, Papa would say. But most importantly, I thank you today for being willing to invest knowledge in us and for being a corporate competitor.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed it. It was a lot of fun.
Boy, Amy really had so much energy. She definitely channeled her inner John Wooden for this conversation. Could not be more grateful for that time and the lessons. The couple of things that stood out most to me was her competitiveness as a child, growing up in a world where grit was so valued, that willingness to be able to kind of build the muscle that she called grit allowed her to manage her time in uncertain moments. What a great lesson that is for all the rest of us. Grit is that ability to show resiliency, to be able and available even when others would rather curl up on the couch. But I most took away her commitment to building time to think. Boy, what a concept. Unfortunately, in our crowded days and our schedule that just continuously piles upon us, carving out that time, being intentional about it, requiring yourself to be able to sit, go clear-minded, and think through the challenges that we have ahead. Those are the moments that will change and better our outcomes. What a great lesson. I can't thank Amy enough. Let's go out today. Let's use these lessons and let's go be corporate competitors. If you haven't already done so, remember to download the notes I took from today's session on corporatecompetitorpodcast.com/109. Those notes include a reflection question so that you can incorporate our podcast into your personal growth plan. If you could share one habit, one thing you've done consistently that allowed you to separate yourself from your competitors, what would it be? In my 30-year career, 2,500 of the greatest athletes, coaches, and leaders answered that question for me.
This is Don Yeager, who did that article I was telling you about.
Don, Dave Sims with Coach K. How you doing?
Hey, Don. How you doing, my man? Great, sir.
What they gave to me is what I'm giving to you in my online course, journey to greatness. Through engaging storytelling and on-demand videos, you will learn the 16 habits that will jumpstart your personal growth. I will instruct you on how to apply these winning characteristics to your life through custom workbook exercises. We are slashing the price for our podcast listeners. Lifetime access to Journey to Greatness is normally $399, but for our podcast listeners, it will be $49 with the code podcast at checkout. Click the banner on corporatecompetitorpodcast.com to enroll. Thanks for listening to the show. I would be so grateful if you left us a rating and a review. We will be rolling out a new episode every Wednesday. To be the first to listen, subscribe to the podcast on our website, corporatecompetitorpodcast.com. Plus, as a thank you gift, you will receive a free chapter from one of my best-selling books on the habits of high-performing teams. Stay in touch by connecting with me on social media at Don Yeager, Yaeger, on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Until next week, I appreciate you.